So we're exploring a side of the Dharma that sometimes I think gets a bit ignored here in the West. So we all know that the Dharma is in many ways very, very rational. It makes sense and the practices work. And this is the side of the Dharma that we emphasize most when we introduce people to it. Because we live in a society that has, for the most part, lost touch with any sense of a sort of deeper dimension to reality and a deeper dimension to life, so that people tend to be very skeptical about anything that, as it were, relates to the depths or relates to what can't be touched and measured, any hints that behind the surface that we see there might lie something. And of course the Dharma is very, very rational. We can take it at that level, and we can benefit enormously from it at that level. But there are heights and there are depths to reality that can't be captured by the sort of common sense thinking derived from our usual day-to-day experience, which is what we all too often think of as being rational. And the Dharma is also about these heights and depths of experience as well. In fact, we could say that it's mainly about these heights and depths of experience. So we saw in the first talk in our series that reality is beyond our normal, limited experience of things, as beings who are trapped in a very, very limited bit of space and time. And we also saw that the only way we can think about or talk about realities that go beyond our experience is through metaphor. So I defined metaphor as something that we use, something that's within our experience that we use in order to understand something which is beyond our experience. So we use things from our experience to understand what goes beyond our experience. And you might remember, if you were here that night, a few weeks ago, when we introduced this series, I talked about the parable of the blind men and the elephant. And how each of the blind men, when introduced to an elephant who had never had any experience of before, which was beyond their experience, they related it to something that they did have experience of. So they said, oh, an elephant is a tree, or an elephant is a polished piece of wood, or an elephant is a rope, a bell pull, etc., 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 according to which bit they got hold of. And that was all right. That's all right as far as it went, except that it was only when the blind men started insisting that the elephant was a tree and that it was a polished piece of wood and that it was a rope, that's when things started to go wrong. When they said it's this and it's nothing more, it's what I can relate to in my experience and it's nothing more, when in reality the elephant was something beyond their experience. There was more than anything of those. So we don't want to be like the blind men. We don't want to be like the blind men. Discounting anything, not being able to imagine anything bigger than what we have experienced. We need to be open to the idea that reality is in fact beyond our limited experience and bigger than we can imagine, like elephants. So we need to be open to the idea that there are mysterious depths we don't know about. And that things can happen which to our limited experience would seem like magic. So, metaphors, mystery and magic. And why wouldn't we want to live in a world that is mysterious and magical? Where there are potentials and possibilities that go beyond our limited imagination, based on our limited experience. That is just far more fun than living in a world that's like a dead machine, where only boring, predictable things can happen. So tonight, what I want to do is to talk about one of the ways that the Dharma gives us a vision of the world that is more mysterious and even more magical than our usual assumptions have got room for. So I want to talk about the way the Dharma gives us a vision of a world in which there are different dimensions of being, different realms of being, existing alongside the dimension that we usually inhabit. And we see this clearly, even in the very earliest Pali Canon texts. So we often talk about the Pali Canon as being quite down to earth. Each sutta, each discourse, starts by telling you where it happened, and you can find those places on a map. People have been there. There are real places. They start and they say, it happened here. And then they tell you who was there, and who said what. And especially they tell you what the Buddha said. So, all quite down to earth. And these discourses are as close as we can get to what the Buddha actually said. And many people would like to see the Pali Canon. They describe the Pali Canons as purely rational, commonsensical, fitting in with our Western assumptions, scientific ethics, that sort of thing. But that is actually a serious distortion of the truth, because it's clear from right back to the days of the Pali Canon, Buddhism has had this idea of different realms of being, different dimensions of being. The Buddha often talks to beings called Devas, who are invisible to normal human eyes and who inhabit different dimensions, different planes of being from us. The Buddha even visits these planes of experience, these planes of being, in which the Devas dwell. And on at least one occasion, he takes someone with him. I'll tell you about that later. And it's not just the Devas, and the Devas don't just interact with the Buddha either. On several occasions in the Pali Canon, they appear to people and they give them advice. Or they tell them things that they've been completely blind to. You need to know this, you need to know this. So these Devas can be profoundly helpful if we sort of encourage them. And this word Deva, it's the word that's used to describe these beings from another dimension. And it's obviously related to our word divine or divinity. These are, in a sense, divine beings. And Deva is often translated as God. But these are not gods in any sense that we would understand the term at all. They are higher beings. They dwell in realms of beauty and light. Realms which are an outer reflection of their own inner beauty, if you like, their state of being. They're more, if anything, they're more like angels. Well, they're not quite like angels, but they're more like angels if we want something to compare them to in Western culture than they are like gods. And these Devas are beautiful, beautiful beings. They become Devas particularly by the practice of metta and higher mental states, lovely emotions. And they love the flavour, they love the perfume of metta. And the odour of positive emotions and ethical actions and higher refined states of being, of mental states. So they gather around certain people and they gather around certain places. They are often seen as being the cause of the atmosphere, if you like, that some places have. When we go into some churches maybe that have been around for a very long time, where there's been a lot of devotion going on, or maybe some shrine rooms, we immediately feel the atmosphere, or many of us do. We notice an atmosphere. And according to this view, what we are feeling is the influence of the Devas. The Devas are perfuming that place. Or when a person seems to carry an atmosphere around with them that others want to be with them, we want to be with them, and auspicious things happen to them. Well, that's the Devas. They've attracted the Devas. The Devas are clustering around them. On the other hand, Devas, of course, hate ugly actions, ugly mental states, ugly speech, and they just scatter. And in fact, if we get too much into ugly mental states, ugly speech, ugly actions, maybe we actually track the opposite of Devas, which is quite a frightening thought. And they cluster around us. And incidentally, about Devas and atmospheres, when we moved into this Buddhist centre from our old one in Broomhill, one of the things we did was, when we left Broomhill, we left a whole load of empty bottles around. And we ritually invited the Devas into these bottles. So we could bring them here. So we ritually invited the Devas into the bottles. We put the tops on the bottles. We bought the bottles here, and we ritually released them. That might seem a bit naff. It might seem a bit literalistic. Okay, it might seem a bit literalistic. To the extent that Devas exist, I'm absolutely sure they don't need to be carted around in bottles in order to get from one place to another. But this ritual did express something. It did express something in terms that meant something to us, even if it didn't mean much to the Devas, or it wasn't very useful for the Devas. And okay, you might think that ritual was a bit stupid, and that the whole idea of Devas clustering around some people or clustering in some places is nonsense. Okay, I'll ask you a question. Do you ever experience those atmospheres? Do you ever experience those atmospheres? Okay, then explain them. Okay? Explain them. Why was that? Why is it that people comment on the atmosphere, for example, in this Buddhist centre? Or in many other places that people go into? I mean, I've gone into churches. There's one in, where is it? Oh, I can't remember. Anyway, it's an ancient crypt that was practiced in by Saint Ced back in 700 or something. And you walk in there, and although it's a Christian place, you just want to get down your knees. There's something about it which is so powerful. Explain it. And okay, maybe Devas. Maybe the real explanation is outside our experience. And Devas are just a metaphor. Devas are just a metaphor for something we don't understand, but at least they are a metaphor, and they're a metaphor we can understand. And if you don't like it, come up with a better one. So these Devas in the Pali Canon, they illustrate a sort of principle that runs right through the Dharma from the very earliest days. And this principle is that the world we experience, the outer world we experience, the dimension of experience that we dwell in, is a reflection of our inner state. The two are two sides of the same coin. So in the Buddhism, our inner state and the outer world we experience are two sides of the same coin. They can't be separated. Devas get to be Devas because they are beautiful beings. They get to be Devas because they dwell in metta. They dwell in beautiful, refined states. So the world they live in, when they're not visiting the human realm, is a realm of refined beauty. So, okay, outer world, inner world, two sides of the same coin. I think we can take this at two levels. We can take this at two levels according to how far we're willing to run with it. I think it's really easy to see that at one level we all experience the world through the lenses of our mental states, which means that with different mental states we experience quite different worlds. If we live in dark mental states, we'll experience a dark world. If we live in bright mental states, beautiful mental states, we will experience the world through that lens, if you like. So ordinary people living in the same place, the same objective reality, can in effect be inhabiting quite different worlds, quite different dimensions. So that's one level which I think is quite self-evident and hard to deny. So I always illustrate this with a particular story, which is a fishy story, which you may have heard too often. If anyone heard too often? I'll tell it again then. So Quite a few years ago, this Buddhist centre used to run a cafe, which is now the Pudding Lady Cafe down in Riverlyn Valley. And Amoya Rangsa and I were standing in front of the Pudding Lady Cafe when we saw these group of 4 guys, and 3 of them were in the river apparently electrocuting the fish. So we thought, well, they're electrocuting the fish. And went and said, oh, excuse me, you seem to be electrocuting the fish. And the guy said, the boss who was standing on the bank said, oh, we're from the Environment Agency. I don't know why it's called these days. We're from the Environment Agency. And what we're doing is we're checking the health of this river by looking at the growth rate of the fish, by weighing the fish and measuring the scales. We can tell their growth rate. But what we'd really like is to find a grayling in this river, because grayling used to live in this river, and grayling are extremely susceptible to pollution. And there has not been a grayling in this river since the Industrial Revolution. So if we find a grayling, we'll know this river is now as pure as it was before the Industrial Revolution. And literally, while we were standing there, one of the guys said, got one! Got a grayling! Yes, we've got a grayling! So we're standing by this river that's as pure as it's been since the Industrial Revolution. And about this time, just after that happened, 4 people came along, and these 4 people, they seemed to be under a bit of a dark cloud. I mean, either they were used to taking something that wasn't agreeing with them, or they didn't get enough sleep. They got great big dark rings that were really down. And one of the 2 guys from this 4 people came across and asked exactly the same question, what are you doing? And the guy gave exactly the same answer. And this chap said, well, you won't find any fish in there. I said, why not? He said, well, look at it. It's all brown. And the environmentalist said, well, it's just the peat. It's just the peat colour from the water. She said, no. It didn't used to be like that when I was a kid. So you can see sewage floating down it. You're not going to get any fish in there. So you've got 4 people standing by the same river. 3 of them are standing by a trout stream that's as pure as it's been since the Industrial Revolution. One of them standing by an open sewer. And the difference is in the mental state. So we can live in quite different worlds. At this level, we can live in quite different worlds according to our mental states. Totally different worlds, unrecognisable realities. Our realities would be unrecognisable to each other. So as I've said, at that level, it's easy to see that the people we share our space with, living in the same world as us, can inhabit quite different worlds that are a reflection of our mental states. So we can take this idea of the world being a reflection of mental states at that level, if we want. But traditionally, the Dharma goes beyond this. And when this idea is coupled with the idea of rebirth, the Dharma presents us with a vision of reality in which we can be reborn into quite different realms, different dimensions, that again are a reflection of our inner being, our states of being. So, for example, the very commonly seen wheel of life presents us with 6 realms, what is called 6 realms, that we can, in a sense, mutually create for ourselves by our mental states. Traditionally, we can be reborn into these 6 realms. And some of these, like the animal realm, are below the human level. But one of these realms is the realm of the Devas. The realm of the Devas above the human level, in a sense above the human level, although it's more difficult to get, paradoxically, more difficult to get enlightened from that realm. So we have the 6 realms of the wheel of life that we sort of co-create by our mental states, that we can be reborn into. And elsewhere in the early Dharma, the tradition goes beyond this and talks about a number of different Deva realms. There's only one in the wheel of life, but actually there are a number of different Deva realms that are talked about. So there's this classification. There's a classification in which there are 3 main planes of existence for sentient beings. The lowest of these planes is called the Kama Loka. Kama means desire. Loka is obviously related to our word location. It means place, it means world. The desire realm, the place of desire. That's where we live most of the time. So, why do we get out of bed? Because we want this and we don't want that, we want to make this happen and we don't want that to happen. Those are the things that get us out of the bed in the morning. And this realm, the desire realm, of course, is ruled by Mara, the king of the realm of desire that Mokshitara introduced us to a few weeks ago. So within the Kamaloka, we have realms where beings experience only unhealthy, unskillful desires that are very bad for them. And then we've got the top levels of the desire realm where beings experience only perfectly healthy and skillful desires. And human beings are somewhere in the middle. So that's the desire realm. Above the Kamaloka that we inhabit is what is called the Rupa Loka. Rupa meaning form. It's the realm of subtle form. The realm of subtle form. We might say the realm of archetypal form. So this realm is inhabited by Devas who are not imprisoned by gross matter. They're not imprisoned by the gross matter that makes up our body and that makes up the world around us. But they still have a sort of subtle form made of radiance, made of light. This is a sort of heavenly dimension of great refinement and great beauty. Then above even that Rupa Loka, the realm of archetypal form, the realm of subtle form, there is the Arupa Loka, the formless realm, which is inhabited by the very highest orders of Deva, who are completely free from any sort of form and dwell in the highest states of pure but still unenlightened consciousness. Above that, in a sense, we could say there is only enlightenment. But enlightenment sort of isn't in that scheme. Enlightenment is outside that scheme altogether. It's at right angles to it. An enlightened being is liberated from that scheme altogether. So, as I've said, the main thing I think to take on board about these different dimensions of being is that they are reflections of inner states. They're reflections of inner states of being. And because these places, these locations, are also states of being, that means that we can visit them. We can visit these higher, beautiful dimensions, at least temporarily, if we can raise our consciousness to that level, which we can only do really, usually by meditation. So we can visit the beautiful, radiant world of the Rupa Loka, the realm of subtle form. And we can do this whenever we enter the dhyanas, the states of meditative absorption. So we can visit those dimensions, we can experience their beauty, and maybe we can even meet and get some advice from the beings who dwell there. I'll come back to that later. If we put enough time and energy into the practice of meditation. So in the Pali Canon again, we're told of loads of instances when the Buddha visits these higher dimensions. These, if you like, heaven worlds, if you like. And on at least one occasion, he takes someone with him, okay? There might be others, but I don't know about them. So, for example, we have the story of Nanda. Nanda is the Buddha's brother. And he has gone forth to practice with the Buddha in the forest in a place called the Jeta Grove. But Nanda's heart's not in it. Nanda's heart's really not in it. He's sad. He's discouraged. He's homesick for his own old way of life. So the Buddha realizes this and he has a talk. He has a talk with Nanda. He says, Nanda, what's wrong? What's wrong, Nanda? You're sad. You've decided to go forth, but your heart's not in it, is it, Nanda? What's the matter? And Nanda replies, well, just as I was leaving my home to join you here in the forest, a beautiful Shakyan girl, the most beautiful girl in the whole country, was sitting there combing her hair. And she looked back over her shoulder with her hair half combed, and she said to me, please come back soon, young master. I won't do an impression. I can't get that beautiful Shakyan girl out of my mind, says Nanda. I just can't get her out of my mind, and that's why my heart's not in it, and I want to go back to my village. And then we're told that the Buddha, it says, just as a strong man might straighten his bent arm or bend his straight arm, the Buddha disappeared from the Jeta Grove and reappeared among the Devas in another dimension called the Heaven of the 33, taking Nanda with him. And at that time, it said in the sutta, 500 nymphs, who are called dove-footed, were there with the highest of the Devas in the realm. So 500 dove-footed nymphs. I have to admit that when I first heard this story, I imagined these nymphs as having feet like doves' feet. So feet like pigeons' feet, so bony and claw-like. And I really didn't find the idea all that attractive, actually. But of course, that's not what's meant by dove-footed. That's not what meant. What is meant is these nymphs had feet like doves. Feet like beautiful, delicate birds, light as a feather that could fly, implying that they are delicate. They themselves are delicate and light. They can even fly. Having feet like doves is a bit like maybe Western angels having wings. It's light. It's about lightness, about the ability to fly. So these dove-footed nymphs from another dimension were beautiful, beautiful beyond anything that we can experience in our lower dimension. And the Buddha said to Nanda, okay, Nanda, which do you think is more beautiful? Your Shakyan girl, or these 500 dove-footed nymphs? And Nanda said, no contest. So the Buddha takes Nanda back to the Jeta Grove, and from now on, Nanda's heart is in it, because he realizes there is a beauty that he can experience by cultivating higher mental states, which is way beyond anything he can experience in his usual state. Much more beautiful, even than the beautiful Shakyan girl, who is the most beautiful in all the land. And it's not just the Buddha who can visit those dimensions. So in later Buddhism, we have the story of somebody called Sangha, the founder of the Yogacara tradition. And Sangha was said to have meditated in a cave for 12 years. And while he was meditating in his cave for 12 years, he visited a heaven. He visited one of these other dimensions, in which he encountered Maitreya, the future Buddha, who was sort of waiting there to be a Buddha sometime in the future. So Sangha visits this other realm in his meditation. He meets Maitreya, and Maitreya teaches him. This is a common theme we get in later Buddhism, being taught by Buddhas or being taught by higher beings in meditation by visiting a different dimension, if you like. And what the Buddha teaches Sangha during his 12 years becomes the basis for the Yogacara tradition. The Yogacara tradition in Buddhism rescued Buddhism from the danger of becoming nihilistic, which it had slightly maybe gone towards. It breathed new life into Buddhism. There's a lot to it. I couldn't possibly just even begin to talk about it here. It would be out of place. But it's enough to say that it changed whole cultures. It became the predominant sort of underlying ethos of the Buddhism of China, Japan, Korea, etc. It informed whole cultures. It changed millions of people's lives. So a Sangha visiting this higher dimension, meditating to get to that higher dimension, encountering the Buddha and being taught, a really common theme in later Buddhism, that we can, as it were, mythically speaking, enter other dimensions, encounter sources of wisdom that are completely beyond our normal experience and be taught by them. So we have the witness of a Chinese pilgrim, actually, called Xuan Sang, who visited India trying to get the Dharma. And he talks about a Sangha. He talks about, he says he spent the night receiving teachings from the Deva realm and the days passing on these teachings to the people of the district. So the Buddha can visit these higher dimensions of being, and other people can as well. Through the Buddha's influence, like Nanda, or through the practice of meditation, like Asanga. But the Buddha himself is not even within this scheme, if you like, this scheme of the three lokas, the heaven realms, the three dimensions of being. He's in a sort of different dimension altogether. He exists in a... He's liberated even from those refined and beautiful Deva realms. He exists in this world. He's got a body in this world, in our karma loka world of gross matter. But in a sense, he is not in this world at all. He is liberated from it and in a different dimension. And I think this idea is illustrated symbolically by a story of the Buddha's encounter with a mass murderer called Angulimala. So the name Angulimala means necklace of skulls. A mala is a necklace. The malas that we have tell mantras with is a mala. Angulimala is it's not a necklace of skulls. It's a necklace of fingers. What am I talking about? It's a necklace of fingers. So Angulimala delights in killing people. And for each person he kills, he cuts off a finger and he hangs it on his necklace. Must have been pretty awful, actually. So Angulimala, with his necklace of fingers, he lives in a forest there's a road that passes through this forest, and he delights in killing and robbing anyone who passes along this road. And one day, the Buddha decides to walk along this road. People try to stop him. They say, you can't go along here, recluse, you cannot go along here. Angulimala, the mass murderer, lives in that forest, and he will kill you sure as anything, sure as eggs is eggs. He kills everyone who goes along that road. But the Buddha is completely unmoved by these warnings. And he walks calmly along the road into the wood anyway. So he gets into the wood, he's walking calmly through the wood, and Angulimala speaks him. I think Angulimala thinks, yes. Not just a victim, a Buddhist. He won't even fight back. I imagine Angulimala as this huge, strong, fit man, maybe with a great big bushy beard. He does, after all, live in a wood. Big, strong, muscular, fit guy. And Angulimala sprints after the Buddha, expecting to catch him in no time. And meanwhile, the Buddha walks on serenely without even increasing his pace. So here have the two of them. Angulimala sprinting for all he's worth, and the Buddha serenely, mindfully walking, and the gap between them never gets any less. However long this goes on, Angulimala never catches the Buddha. He never even gets any closer to the Buddha. So eventually, Angulimala is just going on. Eventually he shouts out, "Stop, recluse, stop!" And the Buddha replies, "I have stopped, Angulimala. I have stopped harming. Now you stop." And the story goes on to tell how Angulimala has a complete spiritual turnaround as a result of this encounter with the Buddha, and becomes one of the Buddha's followers. I haven't got time to go into that, but what I would like to draw out is just this image of the huge, powerful figure of Angulimala sprinting for all his worth after the Buddha, and the Buddha serenely walking, slowly and mindfully, and the gap between them not getting any less. Not the Angulimala not getting any closer to the Buddha, never catching him. Because for me, what that symbolises is that the Buddha, in a sense, exists on a completely different plane. Angulimala couldn't catch him because he is like a being from a different dimension. He appears in the world, but in a very real way he is not part of the world. He is quite untouched by it. He actually exists in a different reality, and it's as though he's making an appearance. Thinking symbolically or poetically or metaphorically, it might be maybe a bit as though you and me and Angulimala, we all exist in a sort of dream or a virtual reality. And the Buddha appears in this dream or this virtual reality, but he is not part of it. He actually exists in a different reality, and he's just making an appearance in our dream, which is why Angulimala could never catch him. The word Buddha means awake. He is someone who is awake while we are dreaming. He is just appearing in our dream, symbolically, poetically. We shouldn't take this literally, couldn't take this literally. The Buddha was born a human being. The Buddha had a body. He was encumbered with a human body, so on a physical level, he had to get sick and he had to die, like everybody else. But there's a very real sense in which the Buddha existed in a different dimension and was unaffected by the world that we inhabit. And because of this, he was not limited by things that we take for granted as limitations. We assume everybody must be limited by. According to the tradition, he was not even limited by death. So Buddhists don't speak in terms of the Buddha's death. The Buddha when he was 80, he got very, very sick. It sounds like dysentery, it was described, and he died. But the Buddhists do not speak of the Buddha's death. They speak of his parinirvana, his complete nirvana. So as long as the Buddha had a body, he was at least partially governed by the rules of our dimension, our world. But with the death of his body, he was completely freed. Parinirvana, complete nirvana. And he was freed into a dimension of being that we cannot even imagine or speak about, completely beyond the categories in which we're used to thinking. He was asked about what happens when an enlightened being dies during his lifetime by a chap called Vajragota, who was always asking different questions. And what the Buddha says to Vajragota is, well, it wouldn't be true to say that the Buddha continues to exist or ceases to exist, or both, or neither. And I think what he's saying is it's just beyond the categories in which we're used to thinking. We can't even imagine or speak about it because it's completely beyond the categories in which we're used to thinking. And because the Buddha was, if you like, beyond anything we can think about, not even limited by death, many later Buddhist texts speak of him as being, in a way, eternally present and indeed eternally contactable in meditation, inhabiting a realm, as it were, of his own creation, a pure land, which is a subject that Suryamati will say more about next week. So if an ordinary being, in a way, creates a world by their mental states, how much more so can an enlightened being create a world by their mental states, and even perhaps invite people with a close connection to join them in that world. But that's something that Suryamati is going to talk about a bit more next week, which follows on from this idea of different dimensions, that some of those different dimensions might indeed be pure lands created by enlightened or nearly enlightened beings. Okay, so that's all very right. That's all very nice, all very exciting. But what can we take from this? What might the relevance of this be for our practice? Well, one suggestion that I'd have about this is we might, for example, suspend our disbelief about the idea of different dimensions of being. How would we live if we really thought there were different dimensions of being, as it were, intersecting with this one? Scary thought, we wouldn't be alone. I mean, even perfectly, supposedly rational modern physicists talk about alternative universes. It's starting to get very weird. But, okay, if there were different dimensions of being, maybe we could usefully imagine that. Maybe we could even usefully imagine that, yes, there are Devas, and that they are attracted to positive mental states, to positive actions, to positive speech, to friendship. They love it. They flock. Maybe we could imagine, just as a practice, that that's literally true. We can attract positive influences. We can also drive them away. We can create a beautiful atmosphere around ourselves and in the places we inhabit that others want to enter. We can attract auspicious events. So it's important how we speak and act. We're attracting positive influences. It's important how we speak and act and think, even when no one can see. Maybe that would make a difference if we sort of thought of the world that way. So that's one thing maybe we could take from this idea of different dimensions that could apply to our practice. And secondly, I think we could be open to the idea that we can, as it were, enter real different dimensions in meditation and even be taught within those dimensions. So I am aware of people, I know people who have had what sound like quite significant meditation experiences involving the appearance of Buddhas even, or Bodhisattvas, and sort of tended to dismiss them as, well, tricks played by the mind. Don't dismiss meditation experience as tricks played by the mind. They are just as real as the Kamaloka things we can kick. Thinking back to the story of a Sangha, the person who thinks that the only real things are what we can kick would think that a Sangha's old sandals, which must have been in a terrible state after 12 years, and his cooking pot were more real than his experience of Maitreya. But his experience of Maitreya in meditation changed whole cultures and informed the lives of millions of people. Nobody gives anything about his sandals, okay? Which was more real? So don't dismiss meditation experiences as being just tricks of the mind. We really do enter something when we enter meditation, and if we enter deeply enough, and it's very, very real. So those have been my two suggestions about how to, as it were, bring this idea, this Buddhist idea of different dimensions of being into our practice. Imagine, suspend disbelief, enter into the sense that maybe there are Devas around, and practice to attract them, not to drive them away. Firstly. And secondly, take meditation experiences seriously. They're just as real. Meditation experiences are experiences of a different dimension, as it were, just as real as the experiences we have in this coarser dimension where we kick things. So thank you.